stability of the internet. And then I'll welcome everybody, and then we'll introduce you, and then make some reflections on your presentation. And then shortly after that, then we open for questions and comments. We'll also be reading what is in the chat box, and then we take it from there. So let me switch off my camera and ask Ndate Mathieu also to switch his camera off. And then I take this opportunity to welcome each and every one of you in this platform, saying hello and then welcome to our weekly webinar series on engaged scholarship for sustainable learning environments. And then to make a full participation in the webinar, we have a chat box to collect your questions and comments. And then questions will be answered by the end of the guest session. Let me take this opportunity to introduce our guest speaker for today. Is Professor Dr. Marvin Lynn, who is the Dean and Professor in the School of Education and Human Development at the University of Colorado, Denver. Professor Dr. Marvin Lynn has enjoyed a robust career as a teacher, equity scholar, a public university administrator, and also an artist. His research focuses on race, education, the work and lives of Black male educators, and best practices for advancing teacher diversity in the United States. Professor Dr. Marvin Lynn intellectual pieces are cited regularly in local, national, and international news stories. He is the lead editor of the Handbook of Critical Race Theory in Education, which features chapters of the most prolific scholars in the field of education and law. The second edition was recently published by the Routledge Press. His research is recognized by AIRA, which is American Education Research Association, the American Association of College for Teacher Education, the Critical Race Studies in Education Association, and many universities in the Southern Africa. The title of his talk today is A Critical Race Theory Under Assault, Strategies to Continuing the Fight, the Good Fight in Academia. Prof. Lynn, we welcome you, and the floor is yours. So we'll give you time to do the presentation, and then after that, we'll make some reflections and then allow you to also reflect. And then we open the floor for questions and answers. Over to you, Marvin.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Dr. Nkoane, for the invitation. I really appreciate the opportunity to engage in rich dialogue with you, my South African brothers and sisters, about the utility of critical race theory in this moment. My first visit to South Africa occurred exactly 1 decade ago under the auspices of this very conference on sustainable learning environments. Since that time, I've worked primarily as a full-time administrator in schools of education and in the U.S. In 2014, I was in my first year as an education dean at Indiana University, South Bend, in the state of Indiana. Very conservative state, by the way, and you'll hear me talk about conservatism today and what that means for us as African people or people of African descent. During my time, though, at Indiana University, I was invited back to South Africa, where I spent a week at the University of South Africa presenting a lecture on CRT and education. And I spent a whole week there talking with the faculty and the staff and students there. I had the opportunity to think about how music sort of connects to all of this. I'm a singer as well as an academic, as you heard. And so I got the chance to do a little bit of singing and thinking about the African-American experience of the spiritual, right? And the words embedded within those spirituals, and how they connect to our understanding of race in this context that we live in. And so that was a rich experience. And I found such connections between South Africans and African Americans. But I've been ensconced in my administrative work, and so I've been mostly thinking about that and haven't had the time to really dig deeply into the scholarship in the way that I would have wanted to. And at that time, I was thinking about CRT and critical race theory as a kind of distinctly American discourse that really comes out of the African American experience. And so when I had conversations with South African professors around how might we indigenize or South Africanize CRT, I was a little bit stumped at the time, right? I was sort of, this is an American discourse. In fact, I was thinking about CRT as one of many Western affronts, if you will, on the African personality. And as I've begun to read a little bit more about critical race theory and its connection, particularly to South Africa, I've come to understand that in a very different way. And I want to begin to articulate some of my emergent ideas around that today, and would love to get your input and your thoughts, ideas as we go through the conversation. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the man whom we call SEHD. This is 2014, my first visit to Bloemfontein at what was the University of the Free State at the time. And they managed to get copies of my book there. That's the first edition of the Handbook of Critical Race Theory in Education. And we're selling copies to students and others. And I got a chance to give a lecture there in person. And I have to thank SEHD, who I know has recently passed. He was a man of immense intellectual power and creativity. He was an extremely generous man who was committed to the liberation of South Africa and deeply understood the connections between Africans in America and Africans across the continent, particularly in South Africa. I describe myself as a Pan-Africanist. I believe he was too. I believe that his vision for the Sustainabilities Conference, some people may have thought that, we talk about sustainability in the US as being about recycling and the environment. Well, I think he was thinking about the sustainability of African peoples, right? And what it meant to have a united front against white supremacy. I'll say a little bit more about SEHD, just in honor of him as of his recent passing. He was a distinguished and noted scholar. His work was recognized across the globe. He was respected and loved by scholars like Gloria Ladson-Billings, who I know presented there before I did. Gloria Ladson-Billings is arguably one of the top 5 scholars in the US, perhaps the world. And she had and still has profound respect for him as an intellectual, as an educator, as a leader, as a human being. And so I share that profound sense of respect and appreciation for SEHD for having the foresight and the vision to bring a little boy like me from the south side of Chicago all the way to South Africa to share my perspective on race. I give him credit for helping me to develop a Pan-Africanist perspective on these issues that have allowed me to see beyond geographical context, ethnic and/or tribal differences, and other differences that keep us divided, to understand the global impact of racism and white supremacy, particularly on African people or African descended people. So thank you, SEHD, for your leadership and your global vision for freedom for all African people. May you rest in peace. So today I'll talk a little bit about the core principles of CRT, and I'll try to articulate what I'm starting to learn about in terms of a South African critical race theory and how some of the precepts of CRT apply. And this is from the lens of South African scholars. and then talk about what this global assault on critical race theory, where it came from, what is the source of it, and why we should be concerned, but why we still need to unite toward a Pan-Africanist vision. And then I would love to have some discussion with you. So critical race theory is a very complicated thing. I know, and I like to break it down and to keep it in simple terms. That critical race theorists have certain beliefs about race and racism, right? And so when we talk about race, we believe that race is socially constructed, that it's not biological, that there aren't biological innate differences in people of different races. There may be cultural differences, there may be linguistic differences, but not the differences are not innate or immutable, right? We also believe that race has been used primarily by white people as what W.E.B. Du Bois, who was also a noted Pan-Africanist, must I say, and I think about W.E.B. Du Bois as somebody whom I try to pattern myself after, because he understood that the African condition in the U.S. and in South Africa were very similar, right? And he wrote about that and talked about that. He ended up living in Ghana, and that's where he was laid to rest. And so when I went to Ghana, I had a chance to see his tomb. But he talked about race for white people as a psychological wage that white people could be broke or poor and still believe that they are valued because of their skin color, right? And so race was a form of valued property that white people own. Cheryl Harris in the critical race theory canon talks about race or whiteness as property. And if you haven't read that work, you really should read it, because she talks about the ways in